Welcome to Intersectionality in the American South, where educators, students, activists, and community members come together to unpack current realities for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Each episode, we'll discuss the impact of racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, and anti-immigrant sentiment on the lives of Atlanta residents and BIPOC individuals throughout the South. This is your host, Dr. Katie Acosta, inviting you to embark on this journey with us. This recording is coming to you from the Auburn Avenue Research Center Library on Georgia State's campus. I am here today as part of a film day that Center for Studies on Africa and its Diaspora have put together in collaboration with the Atlanta Film Festival, some departments here at Georgia State, and the Consulate of Canada in Atlanta. My guest today is Michèle Stephenson, award-winning filmmaker and producer. She is here to share her film, True North. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to start our conversation today by asking if you would tell me just a little bit about your journey to becoming a filmmaker.
Sure.
Which I know in your case, you had a different career prior to this, so I'm really interested to hear.
Yes. So, yes, filmmaking is not my first career. I think what's sort of pushed me to really seek my purpose in a way that I feel comfortable with taking risks. So it's actually my third career.
Really?
Filmmaking. So I started off, I think there's way that we embody intergenerational memory and work that sometimes is even unconscious to a certain extent. And my Haitian side, I was born in Haiti. I come from a lineage of activists that actually can trace their activism all the way to the Haitian Revolution. So there's a level, I think, of intergenerational sort of influence that happened at the home where I was really seeking to figure out not only how can I pay the rent, because we didn't come from wealth, but how can I pay the rent and also create some kind of change that I'm comfortable with, that I really feel fulfilled with.
Okay.
And I started in international development and spent a few years in Africa working with the United Nations, and was deeply disappointed with my role, which wasn't really upsetting the apple cart, but actually supporting a status quo that was extractive. And then as a younger person, I had the idea that maybe with law and human rights legal work, I could find myself with more fulfillment.
Sure.
And ended up applying to law school and coming to New York City to study human rights law.
Okay.
Ended up with a lot of debt that I was not expecting.
Oh, no!
Well, it's not that I wasn't expecting, but I was
debt.
kind of putting it to the side sort of in my head, because I had this drive, and then really realizing that the law was not really for me, but it happened at the same time as I discovered the beauty of storytelling and filmmaking specifically. I mean, I always loved the arts. I was actually very much into dance, and my father was sort of an amateur photographer, but I never thought of it as the possibility of a career.
Sure.
And so I met my current creative and a life partner, Joe Brewster, who was making his own transition into film, and encouraged me to pick up a camera and start documentary work. And I fell in love with it. And became deeply committed to doing culture work, because I realized in the work that I was doing that to change laws, or for laws to really be applicable, and we're seeing it now in our country, you have to change culture first. We have to find a common cultural denominator to be able to have a common vision. But also in the work that I do, certainly related to True North, it's also about reclaiming a past and remixing and finding revindication in the stories that we tell, so we see ourselves in complex ways on the screen.
I love that. So you've done so much. I've been struck by the amount of breadth in the different films that you have been a part of and that you've produced. And I'm wondering, how do you know, like, what's the right project?
Yeah, that's a good question. Part of it has to do with the relationships. Who am I making these films with?
Okay.
It's really important in terms of understanding, will my vision be respected? Because if I really wanted to make money out of film or make money, that being a I would have just stayed in law and become some kind of, attorney, corporate attorney or something, a corporate lawyer, which was a lot of what I was exposed to in law school. So the passion for film comes really not just about purpose, but, finding sort of this, a vision that I can execute. And so who are my collaborators is one, right? The people, the participants that I would be working with, what kind of a relationship can we have that is respectful on both ways? Because, documentary film, when you're doing it sort of from the observational perspective, where it's sort of like verite driven, where you're trying to document current day, can be very extractive. And I don't care if you're from the community or not, the minute you pick up the camera, there's always a power dynamic.
Sure.
And so how can I be intentional in breaking those down? And then, of course, there's the subject matter or the story itself, which for me, it's got to be something that excites me at an emotional level. Sometimes something that I didn't know about that stimulates me, or something that I feel that creatively I can really take a chance with. And I can sort of push the barrier in form and content. Because for me, form is also extremely political. It's not just about telling the story. It's how can we push the form that maybe greater represents the communities I'm from in terms of how the storytelling is told, but also how do I break away from sort of white neoliberal lenses in how our stories are told.
Okay, that makes sense. I want to talk about True North. I find it to be such a powerful example of historical storytelling. And I thought it was beautifully done. I really learned a lot. So thank you for putting so much time and energy into this project. For those who have not had an opportunity to actually see it, will you give us an introduction?
Sure. So True North is a story of the Black liberation movement in Canada that centers on these two pivotal years, 1968, 1969, that culminated with a student occupation revolt at a university called Sir George Williams, which is now known as Concordia University in Montreal. So the story is told exclusively from the experience, my elders, because they're my parents' generation, of those who actually lived through and led the occupation and the movement throughout those 2 years. And it includes never before seen archival footage of Black life in Canada, which was extremely important for us to be able to work with.
Yeah. I really enjoyed learning so much about these activists. And I was so inspired by watching this footage and hearing the ways in which they were unabashedly willing to push back. And simultaneously, I was sitting here experiencing this and saying, they sound like a lot of student activists that I see and interact with, as a professor all the time. And I find that there's something about the student activist role that is, I find to be simultaneously really powerful for young folks, and also like this disciplining space for institutions. Like they come in this very disciplining structure for people who are very vulnerable, because they're in a place for higher ed where they're seeking social mobility. And so it comes in conflict with the activism.
Well, a couple of things. So one, they're coming into higher ed situations, institutions that in many cases are more about maintaining the status quo.
Exactly.
And how you and how you navigate that. sometimes you have to sort of lose a bit of yourself in that process. And so there's a tension there. But I am also a big believer that historically up to today, students have always been the moral compass of our society. The unapologetic nature of knowing what is right. And that history often later on down the road proves them right, is extremely important. And the same case for 1969 Montreal occupation of the Black students' occupation of Sir George Williams as today with the question of the genocide in Palestine. And so for me, part of what was important with True North is to help us understand that this is a long tradition of student protest that we can trace back, that students continuously of their generation. I was of the anti-apartheid generation. That was my going out on campus and protesting and pushing for divestment from South Africa in the early 80s, mid 80s. So it was important to put that sort of peg in the thread of history of student protest. Why do that? I think partially is for us to understand that we are not alone, that students are not alone in their protests. They come from a tradition on the shoulders of others, which is extremely important. There's another element that you and I spoke about earlier is the international aspect of this. In True North, you will understand that this was a Pan-Africanist movement. Montreal was a site of Pan-Africanist liberation and discussion. And you had people coming from different socioeconomic classes throughout the Caribbean, right? From very different orientation, economic status, and they came together in Montreal and united around this Black liberation movement. And so they were international students who came together, along with local Black Canadian students as well, who were born there, some of whom have Caribbean ascendants, and others who actually have been in Canada for generations, whether it's through the Underground Railroad or through the Black Loyalists in the late 1700s who came to Canada. And so there's that. But we also see the institutional apparatus working in the same way back then as they're working now.
It
Surveillance.
was a little weird to see that so clearly.
Government surveillance.
Yes.
University boards, bringing in the police.
Yeah.
I don't want to give up too much because people have to see the film.
Everybody needs to watch this
film. But also, deportations.
Deportation. That's what struck me so clearly.
Deportations of these foreign students was part of the tactic. And then there's also the alliances that are cross borders of these of the oligarchy. Because Sir George Williams University and the Canadian government was getting help from the FBI and the CIA in this international surveillance. So much so, the other very interesting item, I don't know if you noticed in the film, is that the U.S. sent military ships to Trinidad and Tobago.
Oh, I guess I missed this.
Yeah, you missed that.
I need to go watch it again.
It's towards the end of the film because the Black students in Trinidad were protesting against the students who were in jail in Montreal, Canada, because there were larger interests at play that had to do that. So these connecting of the dots of the people behind the money, whether it's, the Bank of Canada or the interests in bauxite and in the mines in the Caribbean versus those students now in Canada pushing for equity and equality. It's all interconnected. So it's important to understand the interconnected nature of the oppression, but also the interconnected nature of the force of resistance that challenges borders.
That's super important. And that part I felt very, very clearly. And it first struck me watching this film when I was looking at the connections between Black liberation student movements in Canada and in the U.S. And it struck me that there's this way in which they were motivating and supporting and informing each other, right?
Yes.
So they were
Totally.
this, and that was so interesting for me to see. The very intentional ways in which they were showing up for one another and propping one another up at times.
Yes.
So powerful, right?
Yeah.
And we can learn so much.
Yeah. Yeah. So back in the day, like Stokely Carmichael was constantly going back and forth. He was a friend of Rosie Douglas, who's a main character in the film, whenever there were issues. And he was certainly one of those really pushing us to connect the dots across borders in this push for, Pan-Africanist Black liberation. And also, when the students were in jail, there was a cohort of people who were on bail, but were traveling all throughout the United States and Canada to raise money for bail for those who had remained.
Okay.
And so there was a connection with the Black Panthers that was very, very strong. But also, there's a history in Canada of this internationalist perspective. One is, people may not be aware, but Malcolm X's parents met in Montreal. They together helped establish the UNIA, a chapter of the UNIA in Montreal. So it's been there for a very long time, the UNIA chapter in Montreal, which was also a gathering place over many decades. And CLR James, although based in the UK, there were study groups that he visited, these study groups that were established by some of the participants in the film, Philippe Fils-Aimé, Rosie Douglas, Norman Cook. They were these study groups that were in Detroit with Grace Lee Boggs as well, Toronto, Montreal, London. And so there was also sort of this consciousness raising that was happening across borders. This is not in the film, or there is a shot of CLR James in the film. I tried to give these sort of spots, that were speaking to that, so that those who know will immediately make the connection.
If you know, you know, kind of thing.
Exactly. If you know, you know. And it's still it's part of the tapestry of the film.
Cool.
So yes, it's also this idea for me. So I grew up in Canada, not knowing this history, and have felt robbed in terms of my sense of belonging there. Yeah. It's also putting Canada on the map as really this last frontier of the Black Atlantic. But it's also the last northern frontier of colonial settler ideology and oppression. So they don't get a free ride because they were the Underground Railroad.
Right.
Slavery was there and all of that. So, and their settler colonialism was deeply, both Black and Indigenous populations suffered deeply by Canada's policies.
It's interesting because one of the things I noticed, like getting highlighted in the film, is like the posture of Canadian leaders of like, that's what happens in the United States, or like, we are not like that. I found that posture to be so, first of all, it forces people in the Black liberation movement to have to engage in this like circular argument of like, no, racial discrimination is real and it's here, and these are the ways in which it's happening. And it turns into this argument of like, no, that's not what we're doing. This like intense denial and this intense like finger pointing at, that's what happens over there.
Yes.
Very familiar, and also I thought just a little humorous to see like that level of like intentional oblivion, if you will.
Yeah, intentional. I mean, I think the way Canada's racism expresses itself has been very successful in keeping sort of us in this cognitive dissonance. Because for me growing up, it was a cognitive dissonance. Wait a minute. I was just called the N-word, but then we're talking about the mosaic and Canada's not racist. And then, my parents are going through this, and wait, so the propaganda versus what you're experiencing, and then there's no historical reference for you to have that sense of belonging and understanding because it's not taught in the schools, then you feel very isolated and sort of alienated and living in this sort of like limbo of where can I find the reference of what exactly I'm going through or we are going through.
Yeah.
And yet as we dig through the history, Canada had, a very similar historical progress, but it was treated differently. Segregation, some of there were Black leaders to desegregate theaters, desegregate hospitals, all of that kind of, the same kind of sort of behavior. But it was dealt with publicly very differently, and in some ways in a very sort of sophisticated way.
Huh.
Yeah.
So you feel a little robbed.
Yeah, for sure.
I would too.
Yeah. So this film in some ways has been a really healing endeavor for me in my relationship with Canada.
Okay.
And a sort of being able to have the privilege and opportunity to acknowledge experiences of these elders, to put these experiences on the map in the way that I was, able to execute it in a creative way. I feel very grateful for, but yes, it was a healing process. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And interestingly enough, I went to school with Rosie Douglas's daughter. So,
really?
Yeah. So we were in college together in Montreal, and the occupation never came up. It's so funny. She even introduced me to Kwame Ture because he spoke at Concordia University while we were in college. And I remember, meeting him and being in, complete sort of awe of that, of being able to meet him. So I grew up with the children of icons, and I guess we were involved in our anti-apartheid stuff, but also involved in our studies, and so it didn't come up. That history didn't come up for us in the same way. Yeah, and I was very busy focusing on getting to know the Caribbean in school, the Caribbean studies.
Yeah, sure.
So I was taking a lot of those classes, and Black feminism and things of that sort. Mm-hmm. So Canada for me became sort of this because I didn't have that intentionally. I think they didn't, teach us that connection. I felt like I didn't want to invest the time in that way. And Debbie Douglas I think she was at the time maybe also a foreign student coming from Dominica. Yeah.
Okay.
Because Rosie Douglas became Prime Minister of Dominica.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. He became the leader of the Labor Party movement there, and then became a prime minister a little bit in the early 2000s, and then he died 8 months later. So there are a lot of conspiracy theories about his death and all of that. It seemed to have been health related, but it's still a big question mark. Why then? Why so quickly after?
Interesting.
Winning. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about the women in the film. Mm-hmm. The voices, Josette. Mm-hmm. There was so much power in the ways in which they engaged in this retelling. And I'd like to just ask you about your decisions about who to include and what voices to center in the project.
So on our first glance of the archival material that we saw, certainly the visual material, you would have thought that women were not involved in the movement because there may be some text references, there may have been some photographs, but very little audio-visual material of interviews or, speeches by these women. But as we turn to academics and turn to, the stories that we were hearing from the people of that in that period, the role of these, the pivotal role of these Black women emerged, and us being basically a full team of women. We really were very intentional in digging as much as we could to center those stories with whatever we could find.
Okay.
Brenda it was very difficult for us to find her.
Really?
Brenda Dash.
Okay.
She was living in Las Vegas. She's now passed away. But I had to take a very special individual flight myself to meet her and gain trust from her because I guess she's been burned in the past. I didn't know the full story. One, she did leave Canada because of the persecution she was suffering from the Canadian government and Quebec government and police, and settled in Las Vegas in the United States. It's so funny, right?
Wow.
It's the opposite going on. So she went to California and then Las Vegas, and Las Vegas is where I met her. And then she ended up agreeing, and we had a over 4-hour interview with her. And then she passed away while we were editing the film. So unfortunately, she wasn't able to see the full breadth of the film. And Josette, similarly, Josette had never been interviewed. There have been short pieces. There have been other pieces about this particular specific occupation, but with none of the women's voices.
Okay.
In these audiovisual materials, they've participated in some conferences, but not in documentaries. Okay. And so Josette was extremely pivotal. And then there's a particular Black Canadian woman, Joan Jones, who I spent a lot of time in Nova Scotia with her family. She passed away, trying to figure out how we integrate her. But again, there was very little audiovisual material of her. But she was a pivotal leader in the Black liberation movement in Canada over decades. And she essentially was the teacher and trainer of Rocky Jones, who is considered the Malcolm X of Canada. Who you see throughout the film as well. Mm-hmm. But in some ways she hasn't been really given her due in the way that she should, because she really brought him into the world of the Pan-Africanist movement, and encouraged him to go to law school, wrote a lot of his speeches.
Really?
And did a lot for the movement. So when we found this small snippet of a film of her talking to her daughter, we were very adamant about about including it somewhere in the film. So I think this is another way of thinking about how we remix the archive, mm-hmm. and the idea of the lens from which we come informs how we see the archive, how we inform what's missing and give space for that. Like this idea of the absence is the evidence. And really finding ways, whether it's through Saidiya Hartman's sort of critical fabulation, to include that or piece together what we can to establish the presence of these forces, right? And then ourselves, the film, becomes an archive too for the future, for those who come after.
I'm so grateful we'll have this archive for the future. Yes. I can't wait. I'd love to teach this, right? I'm having all these thoughts about ways to bring this into the classroom for students, because I found it very inspiring. So thank you. Yes. I have one last question for you. I'd love to know what's next. What are your future projects? What are you working on? What are you thinking about?
Yeah. Once you're in it for a few decades, mm-hmm. you start to see patterns in sort of the work that you're drawn to. You asked me that earlier. Yeah. And I realized that a lot of the work I do is about bodies in motion, about movement, mm-hmm. but actual physical movement also, how we move and what we bring and what that looks like. And so whether it's some of the previous work with Stateless, which is about Dominicans of Haitian descent, and the oppression that they face in the Dominican Republic, or even our mm-hmm. longer longitudinal film, American Promise, which is about Black boys in the educational system in New York, in these predominantly white environments, but also it's about the parents' movement and their vision of, what does this new environment, what is the potential of this new environment for these young men. The film we did on Nikki Giovanni, which is about going to Mars, which is called Going to Mars. It's about movement to outer space, but honoring Middle Passage in that way. So brilliant. Yeah. So the next a couple of projects I can talk about. One is a film we're doing on Paul Robeson. For those of you who don't know, look him up. You will be completely transformed by the impact of this man. But he was also, the product of movement. and envisioning a different world through his experiences, whether with Africa or in London or in the United States or in the USSR, the Soviet Union. And so we're very excited about this film at early stages, but we're really looking at the impact of his voice. Because when we do sort of profile films, it's less about the chronology and more about figuring out the essence of who they are, both emotionally but also creatively. And what does that mean, both for us as artists, but also for those of us who experience the art form. So it's about his voice, both in terms of his speeches, but also his song too, and what that signified and the threat that voice meant to those in power. And there's a personal piece I'm doing that's more about the matrilineal intergenerational trauma, but also joy and ideas of resistance that have come through my mother and my grandmother, who they moved around a lot across the Caribbean, and sort of understanding what that movement looked like and what it meant and what those sacrifices meant for women of that generation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's going to be powerful.
Yeah. I hope so. But it's a little harder. Filmmakers, artists sort of start with their personal journey and sort of express that first and then go on to do other stuff. I've taken sort of an opposite direction, really coming sort of full circle to then do the deep personal dive in the work that I will be approaching that looks at this matrilineal intergenerational work that'll probably be a hybrid fiction and nonfiction sort of piece. Because, you know, a lot of what we learn about our families and our immediate ancestors, there are a lot of silences, right?
There's so much.
That sometimes are around shame. So that's why, you know, for me, relying on writers such as Saidiya Hartman really give me energy to explore some of this stuff through sort of this idea of critical fabulation and me actually sort of inventing the moments that are silent, you know.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, we look forward to that. So
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation.
It's been a lovely conversation. Yeah. Lovely to meet you.
Good to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Intersectionality in the American South. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at IntersectSouth. For additional resources, visit our website at sites.gsu.edu/IntersectSouth/. Please use the Contact Us feature to leave us a comment. Let us know what topics you want to hear us cover on the show. And don't forget to subscribe to catch every new episode. Leave us a review to help us get the word out to others. See you next month.